In this video, I'm going to teach you how you can land any dream podcast guest that you want without waiting forever and without sending cold pitches. My name is Kevin Schmidlin. I am a podcaster with 2 shows that have both made more than 6 figures in revenue in the past 4 years. I have more than 200 podcasters in my Podcast Accelerator program called Grow the Show, and I am excited to help you get your dream guests quicker than you ever thought possible. So let's hop in. If you're like most podcasters, there is a name, there is a person, there is a guest that you would love to have on your show. It's the name that you are dreaming of seeing in an episode title for your show, and it's the name that you are using as your barometer for having made it as a podcaster. Once I land this guest, I will have made it. Most podcasters have that dream guest in mind, and also most podcasters actually don't realize how quickly they can probably get that dream guest on their podcast. And so in most cases, that podcaster either A, just never sends the pitch, never asks that dream guest to come on the show because they assume that they're too small time or they're not ready yet, it's not the right time, or that podcaster, jumps the gun a little bit and sends a pitch way too early, like 10 episodes in, and the person either doesn't answer them, which feels terrible, or just says thanks but no thanks, which also feels terrible and makes the podcaster totally discouraged, and that sucks too. I, by the way, fell into both traps with my first podcast, which was called Philly Who. It was a show about my hometown of Philadelphia, and I think 5 weeks into launching the show, I was inviting like Philadelphia 76ers and the mayor and Will Smith and all these, crazy big Philadelphia names, and never heard back. And then I also had some guests that I totally could have had on the show, but assumed that I was just not in their league and never asked them. And then after the fact, after I didn't find the show anymore, discovered that they actually knew about my podcast and would have loved to come on if I only knew about it. Both of those situations suck. And so now I want to help you avoid them. So the rest of this video is going to assume that you have that name in mind, right? That one person that is a dream guest that would just absolutely be incredible for you to talk to and have on your show. So we're actually going to start there because it's not good to put all your eggs in one basket in this case. Each student that joins the Grow the Show Accelerator goes through an exercise that we call the Dream 100. Now, this is actually something that was borrowed from Russell Brunson, who borrowed it from somebody else. I can't remember off the top of my head, some sales coach or something like that. This is not something that I made up, but it is something that I adapted to podcasting. And what the Dream 100 exercise means is you literally make a list of 100 dream guests of your podcast. Now, I know what you're thinking, 100, that's so many. How could I possibly come up with 100? I grant you, it's tough. Usually people start to struggle around 50 or 60. But what's cool about doing the Dream 100 exercise is that when you do take it all the way to 100, it really forces you to explore all of the possible guests that you can have on your show, and it forces you to dream big because you gotta fill 100 names. So there's no room for you to be like, oh, I could never achieve that. No, if there's a big name that fits your audience targeting, put them on there. I don't care if it's Oprah or the past president or whoever it is. You need 100 dream names, so you put them all on there. So that's one reason why taking it to 100 is really good, because it puts that person on your list, and then they're just on the list with other people that you get, and it makes you believe that that person is more and more likely to get onto your show with time. The other reason why it's important to come up with a list of 100 dream guests and not just one is because landing dream guests is actually a long game. So I'm going to go into the steps in just a minute, but you got to understand that it takes some serious time to land these folks. They are super busy. A lot of them only do podcast guest appearances at certain times. And so if you want to have dream guests on your show, you can't put all of your egg in one basket and go after one person and just hope and pray that they not only want to be on your podcast, but that now is a good time for them to be on your podcast. So to hedge that and to guarantee that we are constantly featuring dream guests on our show, we make a list of 100 of them. So if one of them says no or doesn't answer us or takes really, really long to get back to us or whatever it might be, we have literally 99 others that we can work on. And by doing this, by taking the long game and by just taking the slow way, it puts less pressure on these invitations. You don't get all worked up about it. You don't procrastinate to send the perfect email. And pretty soon you find that you are almost exclusively featuring dream guests on your podcast. And by the way, Grow the Show Accelerator student Ina Coveney was just featured this week on the Grow the Show podcast because that's what she has done. She has only ever featured dream guests of hers on her podcast, which is called The Global Phenomenon. It's a show about online coaching, and her first guest was John Lee Dumas. Her second guest was Pat Flynn, two huge names in the online coaching space, and she hasn't slowed down from there. And so I actually had her on the Grow the Show podcast to explain how she does it. Some of what you're about to learn in this video will cover that, but also I highly recommend that you hear her story and how she figured this out, because you'll find that she's someone just like you are. She doesn't have a massive audience, and she lands these huge names all of the time. So definitely check that episode to get a deeper dive into how to do this. Anyway, let's get back to it. So before you do go ahead and pitch your dream guests, like I just said, you want to have your list of 100 dream guests so that you're not too invested in a yes or no with this one. And then there's actually a couple of things that you want to do before you start sending pitches as well. Number one is you want to actually follow all 100 of those dream guests on your primary social platform, right? The social media platform that you engage on the most, where you show up as the host of your podcast, and you want to start engaging with those 100 people whenever they post. The reason behind this is twofold. Number one, when you actually comment and engage with your dream guests, you're going to be building relationships with them ahead of time before you ask them for something, before you invite them onto the show, which is already going to put your pitch a leg above everyone else's. That's because that dream guest is going to see you just as an awesome member of their audience, someone who follows them, who has followed them for a while, and they're going to be way more likely to want to say yes to you and come onto your show because they see you as an audience member and a friend rather than yet another random name in their inbox that's trying to get time out of them. Staying in touch and engaging constantly on social media with these 100 dream guests will also enable you to stay in touch with what these dream guests are doing, and you'll get a sense for when it will be a good time to invite them. Because here's the thing, these folks, again, tend to go on promotional circuits when they have stuff going on that they want to promote. And you can usually sense that, like they're about to launch a new course or launch a new book or a new movie or just something. They're just more present. And so once you see one of these big time people becoming more present on the internet, that's a really good chance they're going to have something to market soon. And that means that you have a much higher chance of them saying yes to coming onto your show because they have something to promote and they have a good reason to appear on a podcast. So in summary, one of the two prerequisites to sending out your dream guest pitches is to actually follow those dream guests on your primary social media platform, engage with them and build a relationship with them, and keep in touch with them online. Keep tabs on what they're up to so that you know when the iron is hot and you can strike. Now, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have time to keep up with social media with 100 people. What are you talking about? Nobody has time like that. First of all, yes, you do. Check your screen time app and see how much time you're spending on social media. Second of all, we have actually here at Grow the Show created a framework for how to do this in 15 minutes a day. This is how you're going to keep in touch with your dream guests, build relationships online with your dream guests, and build relationships with new listeners of your show. It's our flagship framework here. It's called Targeted Daily Engagement. And so click the link around here somewhere to check out what that is and how that works. So definitely check that out and start doing that with your dream guests so that you can start building relationships with them now. Okay, so then we know that we have a list of 100 dream guests. We're engaging with them on social media. We're becoming members of their audience. We're demonstrating that we're familiar with their work. When then do we pitch these dream guests and how? Okay, so you now know what you need to do before starting to send dream guest pitches. Now let's talk about when the right time to do so for a given guest is. So you've got your list of 100 dream guests and you're like, okay, which ones do I pitch? Well, I don't recommend cold pitching them really ever. The odds of them accepting are really low. They're, again, just going to see you as another name, as another thing on the to-do list, as just another person who is trying to reap the rewards of the hard work that they've gone through to build their audience. You don't want to appear that way. The other problem with cold pitching that I see in podcasters is that they often will wait until they have the perfect moment and write the perfect email and have this belief that if they just get someone's email address and just send an incredible pitch email and send it right at the right time at 8 a.m. on a Monday, like then the person's going to be so blown away and accept their invitation on the dot. It's not going to work that way, right? And so you have to stop waiting for the perfect time and the perfect email to invite your dream guest. The other thing that I see with podcasters is that they don't think big enough, or they don't think that they're ready now. They're afraid. They want to wait wait till their show is in a certain spot until they have a dream guest on. And while I can understand the desire to wait until you have a certain audience size so that, your dream guest, that episode can be heard by more people, keep in mind that having that dream guest is going to credential your show. Other people are going to see it and be like, whoa, you got so-and-so? Heck yeah, I'm in. And potential listeners are going to see it and be like, whoa, you got so-and-so? Heck yeah, I'm in. So you really don't want to wait longer than you have to invite this person onto the show. So when is the perfect moment to invite your dream guest onto your podcast? Well, in order to understand that, then you need to understand that in order for you to get a yes from a dream guest, one of three things has to be true. Either A, they already have a relationship with you, either virtually or in person, right? So they've already interacted with you in the past. They see your name and they think of an actual human being that they have a positive affiliation with. B, the other option is you get introduced to them personally by somebody who they already have a positive affiliation with, aka they already know, love, and trust. It's a friend or family member or colleague of theirs. Or C, if you have literally no connection with this dream guest at all, the only way they're going to say yes to coming on your podcast is if they are just completely blown away by your pitch. You make them an offer they can't refuse, and it is a total no-brainer to come on your podcast. And I'm telling you right now, unless your name is Joe Rogan, you shouldn't go by C. So that means that you need to go by either A or B. Either you need to make it so that this dream guest has an actual interaction with you one-on-one that is positive where you don't ask them for anything. Or B, that dream guest needs to be introduced to you by somebody that they know, love, and trust. I already talked earlier about how you can build relationships yourself without relying on a mutual connection with these dream guests just by engaging with them on social media. And I will reiterate, you will be floored at how responsive these folks are. Just hop into their posts, comments, respond to their stuff, and you will become friends and you can DM them. It's crazy. But also, even better is when you get introduced to them by a mutual connection that they know, love, and trust. So for each person on your Dream 100 list, ask yourself, is there anybody that you know who is already connected to that person? People that you've worked with, friends that you have, guests that you've already had on your podcast. Literally anyone that you have a relationship, do they have a relationship with them? A nice little hack here is to check LinkedIn connections. Sometimes you'll find that your dream guest is a direct connection to somebody that you know that's already in your network. And so just find them on LinkedIn and see if there's any second connections and if you can actually, contact any of those second connections and just ask for an intro. I'll tell you right now, pretty much all of the dream guests that I've had, the most recent one was Robert Smith on Grow the Show. He's a longtime host of the incredibly massive, famous podcast called Planet Money. And do you know how I got to him? I got to Robert Smith because he was connected to a friend of mine who is the wife of a man that I sang in a barbershop quartet with years ago. She's not just his wife, she's a good friend too. But that's how I met her. So I'll tell you, a lot of your dream guests are going to come from totally random connections that you never would have guessed. So be open to that. But the thing is, we can't control randomness, right? We can't rely on that. So what's something that you can rely on to make direct connections to your dream guest? I'll tell you right now, my favorite hack. I got this from Tim Ferriss, and it has been one of the most pivotal ways that I have been able to punch above my weight class with guests and get people on my show way sooner than I never dreamed of having. And it's this. At the end of every single podcast interview that you do, ask the guest that you just spent 30 minutes or an hour with and you have really good vibes with right now, ask them who's somebody that you think would be a great fit for the show. Real quick, before we split, I just have a question for you. Totally put you on the spot. If you can't think of anybody, it's fine, but we're looking for new guests for the show. Who do you think would also be a good fit for this podcast? And they'll go, And here's the thing. They're going to mention people that they know personally. They will never, ever say somebody that they don't actually know. This works so well that this is actually a step in the research process with my team. So these days, I have a team of folks who help me with my show, and my researcher and producer, Catherine, knows to check the research for somebody who's on our dream guest list, who the guest that we are interviewing this week personally knows. So through the course of the research, you'll be like, oh, this person is connected to Dream Guest. So I go into the interview knowing that. And at the end of the interview, I won't ask for a connection for the dream guest. I'll just say, who's someone that you think will be a great fit for the show? And then one of three things happens. Either A, they just say the name of the dream guest that I had in mind. I would say, oh my gosh, that's someone that we would love to have on the show. Do you know them? And they'll be like, yeah, totally. We go way back. Oh, would you like me to put you in touch? When it's their idea, they'll actually do it. So you want to leave room for it to be their idea to put you in touch. Or they'll say somebody else's name, which I'll write down. Or they might say a couple names of people I haven't heard from, which is incredibly valuable because then we go look them up. And oftentimes, yes, they're a great fit for the show. And the person is willing to make an introduction. And if they don't say the name that I had in mind, I'll also ask. I'll be like, yeah, what about so-and-so? Do you happen to know this person? They're like, oh, yes, absolutely. That's perfect. Oh, we go way back. I would love to introduce you, right? So again, making it their idea, they're more likely to do it. You can totally ask, but if it's their idea to put you in touch, they're totally likely to immediately, as soon as they get back to their desk, put you in touch and put in a good word. So with that, you now have 3 ways to establish a connection with your dream guest. Either number 1, make the connection yourself on social media. It's not that hard. Just be social, comment, participate on social media. Number 2, you can go onto LinkedIn or just search, your network, all these freaking social networking tools, and see if you already have a personal connection to that person. You might. Or number 3, which you should always do, ask every guest that you do have on the show who they think would be a good fit, and ask for a direct connection to that person. So with those 3 tools, you should kind of virtually never, ever be sending cold pitches to your dream guests. Again, it's not that you can't send them. They work sometimes, like if you really get lucky and you send an incredible pitch and you catch them at the right time. But why would you even do that if you have these easy ways to make any pitch a warm pitch? With 100 folks that you're trying to reach and this ability to make any pitch a warm pitch, you have no reason to make cold pitches. Okay, so now you know how to make any pitch a warm pitch. You got a list of 100 people that you can warm up and pitch at any time so that it's just a constant machine of dream guests coming through. But wait, when the time does come to make the pitch and actually get this person onto your podcast, when you get the chance to interact with them, what do you do? Now, I'm not going to give you a script to just copy and paste right here because then it'll be in my voice, and I really think that you can get the gist of this just by understanding what I'm about to say. What you need to understand about pitching someone to come onto your podcast is that you're not pitching them to do you a favor. This is the big mistake that I see amateur podcasters make, which is when they write the pitch, they talk about how excited they would be to have the guest on the show, how much it would mean to them to have the guest on the show, how long they've been waiting to make this pitch. Look, the dream guest does not care about you. And that's not, they're not being mean. Just like you really don't care about anybody else. Like, we're human beings. We care about ourselves, right? As soon as you start to talk to this person and gush about how much they mean to you and how excited you are to chat with them and how much it would mean to you to get them on the show, and you just talk about yourself the whole time, they're not going to even read the thing. They're just going to cast you off into all the other people who just take these people's attention and talk about themselves. Instead, your pitch needs to make it clear to that dream guest why it's a no-brainer for them to come on your show. What is the benefit to them specifically of coming onto your show? In almost every case, it's either audience growth or sales, right? They're either going to sell their product or service more or book or something like that, or their audience is going to grow, right? The people that are in your audience are going to discover them. That is the only 2 reasons, for the most part, that people come onto podcasts. So your pitch should reflect that. Something like, hey, so-and-so, ideally, you already have a relationship with them, and you say something along the lines of, hey, so-and-so, Kevin here. You might remind them of how you know each other. Listen, I just had an idea. I think you might be a really, really great fit for the Grow the Show podcast. The show helps podcasters to grow and monetize. You're a total expert in this little piece of growth and monetization. And I can tell you right now, this audience is super, super, super engaged. And so if you come on the show, there's a really good chance that you are going to get 500 new audience members, 25 book sales, whatever it is that they're promoting. Because again, you've been monitoring them on social media and you know what they want to promote, right? So if you, instead of pitching yourself and asking them to do you the favor of gracing you with their presence, make them a pitch of what you're going to do for them by having them on the podcast. Again, if you just change the framing of whatever you would say ordinarily to them when you make the pitch, it doesn't have to be long. You don't need to send them this big, long masterpiece with all this information. Just ask them a question. Hey, I've got this podcast. Here's what it is. I think you'd be a great fit because X. Here's what I think you'd get if you came on the show. What do you say? That's all you got to do. It's that simple. The other thing that I like to do when pitching is to give them an out, right? So I'll always say, if it's not a great fit or now's not the right time, literally no worries at all. Totally cool. I'm still a great fan. But what would you say? Are you interested in talking more about this? Give them that out. It lets their guard down, and it actually makes them more likely that they're going to say yes. Because here's the thing, if you pressure them so much, what are they going to do if the answer is no? They're not going to tell you no, because they're human beings, and human beings hate to tell other human beings no. They're going to run away. They're not going to answer you. They're going to avoid you. So you want to give them the out so that they actually tell you what is true. You're not trying to convince someone to come on a podcast that they don't want to come on. You're trying to convince them why they should come on, why they should want to come on this podcast. The other pro tip that has served me really well when doing this is not to necessarily immediately go to a yes, no, will you come on the show? And to just leave it open-ended and say something like, are you interested in learning more? What do you think about this? Not like, yes or no, will you come on the show? Are you currently accepting pitches to come on podcasts, right? They might say, no, I'm not currently accepting pitches right now. Great, then I won't pitch you, even though you just did. The final little question that you can, little pro tip question that you can include in there that I heard from Pat Flynn, who is, by the way, a dream guest of mine, is instead of asking them, hey, will you come on the show now or like in the next 2 weeks or something like that, ask, hey, is there any chance you've got some space in the next 6 months for a 45-minute conversation? Who the heck is going to say no to that? Who doesn't have space in the next 6 months for a 45-minute conversation? Oftentimes, they'll say, oh, yeah, totally, and book you like 4 months out. That's a win. That's a huge win. Like people, when it comes to time that is 4, 5, 6 months out, it's like, that's never going to happen. Yeah, sure, we can talk in July. But then July rolls around and they're like, oh, well, I said yes to this person. And most time, they're going to do the show, right? They told you yes. And even if they need to reschedule, they're going to keep to their word for the most part. The other thing to avoid that I get a lot when I get pitched for podcasts is when people just like send you the calendar link, right? So don't be one of those podcasters that, sends a pitch and in the pitch sends the link to book a time. That is so cringy. That is so presumptuous. Yes, it does make it easier for those people who are a yes to just click the time. It skips a couple steps for you. But for people that are on the fence and are not, like, I'm just telling you, it just comes across. I used to do this myself with my Philadelphia podcast. I used to send people the link. And once I had enough credence to be invited on a lot of podcasts, I started getting pitches where people would just send me their calendar link, and it's just so icky and makes me not want to say yes because it's just so presumptuous. The other thing about that is when you are inviting a dream guest onto the show, like, you got to go by their schedule. So if you just hop out of the gate and say, would you come on my show? I interview every other Thursday at 2 p.m. Does that work for you? It better work for you. Like, that's kind of what's coming across here. So the goal from the pitch is either to get permission to further the conversation, right? So another thing I ask is, where should I send a pitch for you to be on the show? That's another thing that I'll ask instead of just saying, will you come on the show right here and now? And again, as you can see, I've got all these kind of phrasings and different tools that I can pull out and use on different scenarios. But that one is really good when people clearly have a system and that they have a team that manages their time. People don't like it when you try to buck their system. So there's a lot of advice out there that says like, just like ignore their gatekeepers and stuff like that. No, don't ignore the gatekeepers. Befriend the gatekeepers, right? Show that you respect their process. Get to the big honcho first, get them to say a yes, and then ask, okay, cool. What's your process? And then make friends with everybody else in the process, because those are the people that are going to decide whether or not that person actually shows up on the interview, regardless of whether they told you yes when you interacted with them. The last thing I'll say is when you send the pitch, avoid sending all of the information that you think that they need to make the decision. This is a very, very common impulse when you're sending a pitch to just send them everything. When you'll do the interview, what the Riverside or Squadcast link is. Like, here's what we do, our background. The show was founded in 1995. I was born on a dark, stormy night. Like, it's too much. They don't care. And even though that urge is to give them as much information so that they'll say yes, really what all that information does is either just overwhelms them so that they completely disengage and don't even read your pitch, or two, it gives them extra information to say no to. So just little information. Here's the show. Here's the 10-word description of what it does. I think you'd be a great guest because this, if you come on the show, you'll get that. What do you say? Cool. So now you have the ingredients to put into the big pot of soup and make your perfect pitch soup. Now, what happens when they answer? So when you send the pitch to have the dream guest on your podcast, you're either going to get a yes or a no. And actually, in most cases, it's either a yes or a not now. Now, of course, respect the word no. If they send a firm no, this is not a fit, I don't want to be on your show, accept that. But in most cases, No is usually something along the lines of, now's not a good time. That's not what our priority is, or something like that, to which you can say, great. Do you mind if I follow up in 6 months and see where things stand? Shout out to Ina Coveney. Again, check out the podcast episode with her about this. She explains it fantastically, how she navigates this space. This alone is probably the tip that is going to get you more dream guests on your show than anything else. Understanding that a no is not a no. And so when someone says no to you, don't get all butthurt and get your ego harmed and, never unfollow them, never contact them again. Look, relax. These people are busy. There's a lot of stuff going on in their lives. If they can't get to you right now, or it's not the right time yet and you need to, establish yourself a little bit more, that's totally cool. I'll tell you right now, when I launched my Philadelphia show, one of my dream guests at the time was famous venture capitalist Josh Koppelman. He's well known. He's invested in tons and tons of really incredible companies. He's based in Philadelphia. And for me, it would have been a dream to have him on the show. I launched the show in May of 2018, and I think in April, I got Josh's email address and I sent him a pitch. Hey, Josh, would love to have you on the show, blah, blah, blah. To his credit, he responded to me and he said, basically, thanks, but no thanks. It was great to get a response, but I admittedly was insanely disappointed. But thankfully, I just kind of intuited that no doesn't mean no forever. It just means not now. Fast forward literally a month, and My Philly podcast started to get some buzz around Philadelphia, and I got coffee with somebody who works at a nonprofit organization in Philly called Philly Startup Leaders. Her name was Jacqueline. Shout out to Jacqueline. At that coffee get to know you, Jacqueline said, hey, Philly Startup Leaders is currently planning for their conference in December. What would you say about doing a live recording of your podcast? I was like, wow, that sounds like a really cool idea. I'd be down. She said, cool. Who would you have in mind? I knew that Josh Koppelman was on the Philly Startup Leaders board. So I said, what would you say about Josh Koppelman? She was like, oh yeah, he loves us. I'll send a pitch. Within 2 days, I heard from Jacqueline, heard from Josh's folks. He's super excited. He's in. So in the course of a month, I went from being rejected, although kindly, shout out to Josh, rejected by my dream guest, to then having a date, December 7th, 2018, to interview that dream guest for the podcast in front of 300 people. The difference this time is, number one, the invitation came from a connection that Josh knew, loved, and trusted with Philly Startup Leaders. And number two, the invitation was more valuable to him because not only was this interview going to be on the podcast, but also it would be in front of 300 people. So the nature of the pitch was instantly changed, and my no went to a yes in a matter of a month. If, however, what I think will happen most of the time happens, you will get a yes. And so what do? Number one, make it as easy as possible to get on their calendar. Ask them for their Calendly link. You can send them yours, but say, hey, if you prefer, send me your Calendly link and I'll book a time. You don't need their bio yet. You don't need their headshot. You don't need them to fill out a DMV form that's 10 pages long to get time with you on the podcast. Stop sending podcast guests a long form to fill out to book a time. That saves you time. It makes it really hard and annoying to do you a favor and come on your show. Also, please don't make them sign a blood contract to promote your show on their social media feed. You don't get people to do that by making them promise. You get people to do that by making stuff that's really good that they want to share. Don't insist upon a pre-interview. Don't ask them for anything other than, yes, wonderful. Get on their calendar and that's it. Don't over-communicate. Yes, check in with them a week ahead of time. Confirm the time. Give them the bare minimum information they need to show up and do the interview well. But other than that, just make it super, super easy for them to be a guest on your show. When the time comes for the interview, be prepared. Be their friend, not their fan. So don't overgush, right? You can be either someone's friend or their fan, but it's really hard to be both. Be early. Don't show up. If your interview's at 2 p.m., don't show up at 2:05. If they reschedule, be gracious. At the end, be grateful. Again, not gushy. And then at the end, crush it, be prepared, give them the best interview you have ever given. And then finally, when the interview is over, be proactive and ask them, what? Who do they think would be a great fit for the show? So there it is. Now you know how you can land virtually any dream guest on your podcast. You now should be on your way to having a list of 100 dream guests so that for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, however long you're podcasting, you can constantly be raking in the good gets, constantly having big names on your feed, and you didn't even have to wait until the perfect moment and the perfect time to cold pitch them. That is all I have for you today. I would love to have you in the free Grow the Show community. If you have any questions or comment here below on the video, and I'd be happy to answer. Other than that, stay tuned, subscribe, ring the bell, all the blah, 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 blah. You know it. I'll see you in the next video.